And they said, honestly, Ryan, nothing. And I was like, all right, I need to find a way to be a part of separating the identity from who you are and what you do, all that type of thing. So I decided I wanted to commit more focus on the youth and high school space to try to get ahead of a lot of that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Cutoffs and Coffee podcast. This is episode 62 with Ryan Virtue. As always, we are here, your hosts, James and CT from T3 Performance, and we have an absolute banger of a podcast to come back for episode 3. After some time off, we're back and had an unbelievable conversation with the partnership manager of the Positive Coaching Alliance, Ryan Virtue. We dive into all things youth sports. Changing the culture of youth sports is what PCA tries to do, and that's their goal and that's their motto. And so we dive in, how can we change youth sports? What does youth sports look like, and where is it going, and where does it need to go? Athletes need to be safe, seen, heard, and valued. This is all things that we talk about in the podcast. We dive into, again, how we can, as leaders and coaches and parents, help guide the way for our youth athletes as they go through their journey. Everybody's got a different journey. Some are tougher than others. Some are easier than others. What can we do in leadership roles to be able to help and put our athletes in the best scenarios and best situations to help them grow as not only athletes, but individuals?
And this episode is brought to you by the Positive Coaching Alliance. You can check out their website for a lot of free resources, whether you're an athlete, a parent, or a coach. Go to positivecoach.com. Anybody listening to this episode, there's going to be a nugget in this episode that you could take and start thinking about immediately and start putting into practice immediately. And to bolster that, go to positivecoach.org and check out all of the free resources. Again, whether you're a parent, a coach, or an athlete, there's a lot of good information how to navigate youth sports, college sports, and everything in between to come out of sporting environments as a better human. And that's what the PCA is all about.
And if you like what we're doing here on Cutoffs and Coffee, subscribe to us on Apple or Spotify, wherever you hear your podcast, and then also on YouTube for the video version. Be with us. We're going to start releasing episodes again. We have some great guests lined up, and we're really excited to share some information with you. So without further ado, here is the conversation with Ryan Virtue of the Positive Coaching Alliance. Ryan, welcome to Cutoffs and Coffee, man. How are you today?
I'm great, man. Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, man, this is going to be awesome. Real quick, for everybody watching on YouTube, explain the hat wall a little bit behind you. We were talking about it off air a little bit, but that's a really cool thing you got going on.
Yeah, this is my memory wall. So I'm a baseball guy through and through, and had a chance to play college baseball, and then worked in college athletics administration for about 10 plus years. And my wife and I have been doing the Major League Baseball Stadium Tour thing, and so that's kind of how it all started. It started with Major League Baseball Stadium Tour. I buy a hat at every stadium. Been to 28 of the 30 so far, so 2 left to go. And then it just kind of started while I was working in college athletics. Every time I set foot on campus, I would pick up a hat if one was available, or somebody would give me a hat. And then next thing I know, everybody was sending me hats and wanted their school represented on my wall. And so if I paid for all these, I'd be broke. Thankfully, most of these were gifts, so except for the major league ones and a lot of the pro experience ones. But yeah, it's my memory wall. So almost every hat has a memory tied to it, whether it's a person, place, or experience that I was blessed to have.
What are the last two major league stadiums?
Yeah, last two actually, it's crazy because they're both AL Central teams. So I have the Kansas City Royals and the Minnesota Twins left, and that's it.
Okay.
So yeah, kids kind of slowed down that movement a little bit. I'm blessed to be able to coach my 2 kids now and all that side of things. But yeah, that kind of got in the way of some travel for a little while. So it's been a while since we've been to a new stadium.
Well, it's something to look forward to.
And 100 plus games, right? It's like you at least have some good opportunities to be able to get out there.
For sure. And crazy enough, my kids are Chiefs fans because obviously they're winning right now. And so, so we're going to try to tie it to a Chiefs game if we can get up there in September timeframe.
Chiefs, man, love them or you hate them. One of those
Yeah,
teams, right? And a
100%.
lot of us here are on the latter of that, right?
Yeah.
Here in Cleveland. So Ryan, before we jump into the PCA stuff, which we're going to talk a ton about, tell us something about you that we can't find from a Google or an Instagram search.
Yeah, there's man, I'll tell you, I'm a pretty open book. So anybody who knows me, I don't hide a lot. I'm kind of a what you see is what you get guy, but I will tell you my favorite thing that I do every single day is when my kids go to bed at night. We started this as soon as they could talk. I wanted to introduce them to the concept of gratitude and you know, how bad days aren't bad days, they're bad moments within the scope of a day. And so from when they could speak, we started instilling what we call three favorite things, where my wife, myself, both my boys go around the horn basically and give what are your three favorite things that happened that day. And then we give an open opportunity if there's something that happened over that course of that day, because not life is not sunshine and rainbows and kumbaya. So if there's anything that happened during that day that they did not like, they also have the chance to share that, no matter how long that takes. And so that's my favorite thing every single day. And it's really helped me get to know the way my kids think and the way they work and how I can be the best dad possible. So every single day we do that, even when I'm traveling or my wife is traveling, we're texting our three favorite things or taking a video of our three favorite things. And it's just my favorite thing of life is being a dad. So so I don't talk a lot about, you know, outside of my coaching my kids and some of those other things and pride points. I don't talk a lot about like the developmental side of things that I do with my kids, but that's my favorite part of every day.
And we're going to say this a couple times, I'm sure, throughout the conversation, but that is so powerful what you just said. Gratitude practice is something that we actually talk about every episode. We actually wrap the podcast up by, you know, asking people to continue to practice gratitude. But I started probably, I mean, it must have been 4 or 5 years ago now. Every morning I wake up. That's the first thing I do. You know, I wake
Yeah.
up and I look, my wife's next to me, right? The person I love the most on the planet. I'm in a climate controlled area. I've got a bed that I paid for in a house. And I think, man, not everybody gets to do this, right?
Amen.
Wake up, first thing I do is practice gratitude. And then I feel like it kind of, you can kind of carry that energy throughout the day. That's so powerful.
PT, I love that, man. It's such a powerful way to start the day. I use an actual app called the 5 Minute Journal,
Yeah.
where it goes through what are your three things you're grateful for that day, what are three things you're going to do that day that's going to make that day great, and then what's a positive affirmation that you can say about yourself. And on the tail end of the day, you get to talk about three things that you loved and one thing that you would have done differently to make that day even greater. So it's a really good self-reflective tool for sure.
So good. Instead of just reaching for the phone. And I catch myself doing that too. I'll roll over, reach, I'll be like, nope, hold on a second.
100%.
Gratitude, we're here, we're present, and we get going. So tell everybody,
Absolutely.
tell our listeners about what you do and who you are.
Yeah, so I'm very blessed to serve an organization called Positive Coaching Alliance. So it's a national nonprofit organization, 501c3 organization. And our mission at the end of the day is to change the culture of youth sports so that all kids, regardless of their social or economic circumstance, have access to a positive youth sport experience. We really fully believe that access to sport should be a right, not a privilege. And so we're doing everything we can as an organization, not only to increase accessibility and equitability, you know, for sport, but also just as importantly, make sure that the environment that we're creating access to is positive and focused on character development. Because at the end of the day, vast majority of our kids aren't going to go on to play college, go on to play pro. So how do we use sport as a vehicle to develop character and positive contributors to society? So so I get to work with this organization. We provide, you know, positive youth development training for coaches, youth sports parents, high school sports parents. We do a lot of kind of entry-level sports psychology, character, and leadership development work with athletes. And then we do some cultural work with organizations and board of directors to make sure that the entire system that is supporting the development of our athletes is on the same page and rolling in the right direction.
I love what you said there. Changing the culture of youth sports. What
Yes,
was
sir.
the issue? What do you think the culture was with youth sports that needed something like the Positive Coaching Alliance?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lack of intentionality and self-awareness among adults that tends to come out in the intense environment that youth sports can create, right? We've got our pride and joy on the field if we're parents. If we're coaching, we've got, our ego tied to our performance as a team, right? And so there just tends to be in a lot of cases where, when we face adversity and we aren't self-aware, we aren't intentional in the way that we act instead of simply knee-jerk react in intense situations, it comes out in ways that are not beneficial for our kids. It's not, I'm not just talking yelling and screaming, sarcasm doesn't help our kids understand to learn and grow. Telling our kids simply what not to do all the time doesn't help our kids. Like, we need to be intentional about telling them what they can do versus what not to do. So there's just a lot of, I think, lack of self-awareness, and the reality is our kids, their brains aren't fully developed yet, right? The human brain doesn't fully develop until about the age of 24 years old. And so how we're present as adults in front of our kids matters a lot. And you see the burnout rate, the average age of kids dropping out of sports is 11 and a half years old right now. So they're not even making it to middle school athletics.
Jeez.
Burnout is a big issue. Over programming is a big issue. Sports specialization is a big issue. There's a lot, and we can go a variety of different ways with this conversation today. But a lot of it is adult driven. It's what we desire as adults, and it directly impacts the way our kids are able to be present. And so that's why I think the culture needs to be shifted. We just need to increase intentionality in a lot of ways in the youth sport realm.
Now,
When did this sports specificity start? I'm trying to figure that out, man, because we've got, Tommy John's happening at like 10, 11 years old. Kids aren't on swim team anymore. Kids aren't doing things that, James and I did growing up. Like, it wasn't even a second thought, right? I remember vividly, like, thank you so much to my parents for doing these things, but I would get off the baseball diamond. They would drive me to the swim meet, and I would take my baseball pants off, have my swim trunks underneath, jump into the pool, and then race in the relay. And then, you'd go home and you'd do something else. Like, when did all this happen? And what can we do as leaders to kind of help guide people in the right direction here?
I love this question, CT. And it's one I end up having a lot of conversations with about when did it happen. And my pivot is always, it really doesn't matter when it happened. I will address that, but it doesn't really matter when it happened. The fact that it's happening and what we do moving forward is what's most important, right? Because we can't change the past. We can never change the past. It's like what we try to instill in our kids as coaches and as parents, like next play mentality. You can't change what happened, but how do we move forward with, again, more intentionality? But, a lot of it, when the recession hit was 2008 timeframe, a lot of city parks and recs had to pull funding from different sources, and youth sports was oftentimes one of those areas where they had to pull funding from. And so when there was minimal participation opportunities, parents would step up and create these youth organizations and try to fill that void. And so it went from being recreation focused to being parent run, and then it became more business focused, right? And now it's a multi-billion-dollar industry, youth sports is, and I don't necessarily think that's all bad, as long as, again, there's intentionality in that environment, and how are we intentionally developing our kids and what are we creating opportunities for. But yeah, I think there's that keeping up with the Joneses mentality of my kid has to be really good at this and everything that they do, and they, the comparison mindset kicks in big time. And if, so and so's kid's doing this, well, my kid has to do that, and they have to do it better, right? And so they just naturally kind of fall into that line of sports specialization, that you only have so many hours in a day, right? So if you're dedicating so much time to a specific sport, there's just no opportunity to play other sports. More sports have become year-round. Soccer is a big one where even here in my own community, the youth soccer league, you sign up for the fall, you're automatically signed up for the spring, right? It's a dual registration. I'm like, well, my kid plays softball or soccer in the fall. I want him to play baseball or lacrosse or whatever he wants to play in the spring. I don't want him to double dip in that sport, but it's set early on. Like, this is the expectation. You commit to the fall, you commit to the spring. And so there's just, again, I think there's so many different ways we could go, in terms of what happened, how we got here. But again, I think looking forward, we just need to increase intentionality. Like, what do I truly want for my kid? Right? What kind of experience do I want for my kid? My kid still plays Little League baseball right now. And the biggest reason being they're 8 and 6. It's 2 days a week. They've got 6 days a week to be kids and go play in the yard. Like you mentioned, CT, they're playing with older kids or playing wiffle ball in the backyard. They're getting reps without me providing them intentional reps, and arguably learning more from those free play environments than they would if it was overly structured all the time. So those are just some thoughts, man. But I can talk about this stuff all day because it's right my passion.
Yeah, that's definitely what we're here to do today. I think it would be helpful to maybe take a small step back, kind of looking at some of the other careers that you've had, and then how that's kind of helped you where you're at now, because you've been on both sides, and now are a parent coach. So take us back when you were administrator, and then did you have any paradigm shifts in kind of how you thought of coaching during that time, leading you to the PCA?
Yeah, great question. So let me back up a little bit. A horrendous Canadian that played ice hockey, or never played ice hockey. I played baseball. That was my sport. So I had a chance to play college baseball, and baseball in a large part for me was my identity, right? Like, I was Ryan the baseball player until graduation on senior day. Baseball was done overnight after college, right? And so it was kind of that, like, oh wow, okay, now what do I do? My saving grace was I started going in collegiate athletic administration. And so I knew I wanted to work in sport. I knew I wanted to essentially create similar experiences to what I had, in terms of the positive side of the sport experience that I had, and develop my love for the game. And so I did that. And while I was doing that, I was doing private instructional lessons and coaching. I coached my first it was a 13U team in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And one of those paradigm shifts for me is, I remember there was one game, they made like 6 or 7 errors, and I took them down the line and I ran the heck out of them. And I said some words that I would never now say in the presence of children. And the only reason I did it was because that's what my coaches did to me. Like, there was zero intentionality behind it. It was just, you guys blew it. You made all these mistakes. Go run until I tell you to stop, right? And that's just how I don't know about you guys, but that's in some instances how I was coached. And so there was zero intentionality. And where that paradigm shift came for me is, one of the kids came up to me in the middle of running them, and he said, "Sorry, coach." And I was like, well, figures Canadians saying sorry, right? But he goes, "Sorry, coach." And I was like, "You didn't even make an error today." And then it dawned on me. I'm like, why is he feeling the need to apologize? And what am I doing now that's impacting the way these kids are going to develop moving forward? Because at the end of the day, in the youth sports world, they're going to make mistakes. They are developing, right? And what I was just doing by taking them down the line and running them the way I did was really digging in that failure is not appropriate and it's not okay, right? And that's the opposite of the developmental approach that I needed to be taking. So the very next practice, I apologized to the kids and completely shifted the intentionality that I brought to correcting. You still have to correct as a coach, right? It's part of the job. But I shifted some of the ways in which I did it. So that was one major paradigm shift. The other one for me, career-wise, leaving administration to come more on the full coaching focus side, I kept seeing the mental health trajectory of our college student athletes. And so much of it was identity driven. And so I started asking a lot of questions of leaders around the NCAA and other leaders that were supporting mental health development. I'm like, well, mental health is important. Don't get me wrong. And it needs to continue to be important because these issues are occurring and we need to support our athletes through them. But what are we doing to get ahead of it was my big question, right? I'm like, we can tackle mental health, but once we tackle it from a health-based perspective, it's already an issue. So what are we doing for more a wellness, preventative-based approach? And they said, honestly, Ryan, nothing. And I was like, all right, I need to find a way to be a part of separating the identity from who you are and what you do, all that type of thing. So I decided I wanted to commit more focus on the youth and high school space to try to get ahead of a lot of that. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years.
And I love that thought process behind get to the root and go and treat, the problem as early as it might start showing up. And I'm lucky enough now, like my role is more working with our coaches than it is working with athletes. But one group that I still work with is a young group of like 12 to 15-year-old athletes, because I think that is oftentimes when we're introducing exercise and performance training for the first time. And so if I get to be your first strength coach, I know that like you are going to be keeping a lot of those habits. Even if you're done playing sports, you found a passion for exercising, an outlet for stress, that is a learning environment where you can fail forward. So I just love the approach, and you have, the athletes, you have programs for athletes that can help them and communicate and reach them to educate them. You have programs for parents, and ways to help parent coaches communicate better. And then you also work on like the actual coaching side in terms of, more coaches that are paid to coach, so to speak, whether that's the high school coach or the college coach. As you are working with those three different groups, where do you typically start when you're involved with a new program or a new organization or a new team that you get to help and encourage?
Yeah. So if ideally our approach is working programmatically. We have tools and resources and online courses. So if one of your individual listeners as a parent or an athlete wants to consume some material, we have online courses, we have opportunities for individual consumption. But when we talk about culture shift, it's really an organization to organization thing, right? And so, step one for us is always, hey, is the leadership group, is the board of directors of this local little league, youth sports organization, whatever, are they on the same page in terms of what their mission and values are as a program? Because if they're not on the same page, then they're the blind leading the blind, right? And so we need to make sure, again, increasing intentionality and the purpose of the organization's existence for starters. So we typically start with that. The next and arguably most impactful group is the coaches, right? And so we do a lot of positive youth development coach training, and really what positive coaching is about. It's again not sunshine and rainbows, kumbaya. It's not about participation trophies. It's about really like what positive coaching truly is developing intrinsic motivation in athletes where they have a desire and have an environment that supports their desire to grow, right? If we can create an environment where athletes feel safe, seen, heard, and valued, it is amazing what they're able to accomplish. Not even necessarily in terms of pure outcomes, but in terms of their growth, right? And progression. If we, again, safe, seen, heard, and valued is really what type of environment we're trying to create. And so we take that approach to developing coaches, but then we really take the same core philosophies and approaches and apply them to parents and apply them to the athletes themselves, because it really is about how do you make yourself better as an athlete, right? How do you make your teammates and those around you better? And then how do you honor the game, right? And that's where we talk about respect for rules and officials and opponents and teammates and yourself, right? So that's really the core of everything. And we can apply those same three core focuses to parents and coaches and athletes. It's just the way we talk about those core things are vitally different because the perspectives of a coach and a parent and athlete are very different.
How can we pass some of that information, that similar information from a 10-year-old athlete to a 40-year-old parent? How would you, manipulate those conversations so it makes sense to the athlete and makes sense to the parent?
Yeah, so I'll give you some of our core principles, right? So when we talk about um, making yourself better, right, as an athlete, we have this acronym that's called ELM. It's the ELM Tree of Mastery, ELM. E is for effort, L is for learning, M is for mistakes are okay, right? So we want to instill in our athletes that, hey, we expect effort is a full controllable, right? We want your best effort every single day. Learning and openness, right? And that side of things is a full controllable, right? You're going to fail, right? What do you learn from that mistake, right? How do you put in the effort to make sure you don't duplicate that mistake? And then let's go make the next one, right? So the mistake management piece of that Elm Tree of Mastery is huge. So trying to instill that mindset in the kids is step one. Usually the kids are actually the most open to that and are oftentimes the one that can overcome failure quicker unless there's an external influence that keeps them in those failure moments, like a coach or a parent or a teammate, right? And so our approach to the Elm Tree of Mastery then is, okay, this is what we're trying to develop in our kids. This now, you as a coach, is how you work to create an environment that supports that, right? How you look at failure as a coach dictates how your kids are going to be able to overcome failure, right? There's nothing worse than, I'm a baseball guy. The thing that drives me the craziest as a pitcher, especially, is when kids are on the field, they're pitching in the game, and all you hear from the dugout is throw strikes.
Oh,
Like,
man.
thanks, coach. Like, what do you think I'm out here trying to do? Right. So it is some of those things that for whatever reason we as coaches or parents or whatever feel like we need to say is actually not beneficial at all to our kids. My college coach, my freshman year, was really big on what we called the cardinal sins of pitching. Right. So no 0-2 to a walk, right? No 4-pitch walks, no leadoff walks, no back-to-back walks, like all this list of things not to do, right? Don't give up a hit on 0-2, right? All these lists of things not to do. So all of a sudden now, when you're on the mound and you're in those moments, instead of thinking, hey, I'm going to attack here, I'm going to throw my best pitch here, you're like, oh crap, I better not throw ball 4 here, right? And so you're thinking about the failure and the fear of the failure instead of that mindset of, and it's a subtle shift, but it's like, throw your best stuff here, attack this hitter. Like, if that's the messaging that's coming from our coaches, that shifts entirely the ability of the athlete to really focus on that elm, right? That effort, learning, mistakes are okay mentality. If we're focused on the failures as coaches, we're doing a disservice to these kids. And it's very much the same thing as the parents, right? So the parents, that car ride home is vital. What you say to your kids after a game is vital. You know, most people, you see a kid in a uniform at the Mitchell's ice cream shop, the first question that comes out of people's mouth is, did you win?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And it's like, what are we telling our kids that we think matters most as adults? Right? It should be, did you have fun? Did you feel like you got better today? Like, those are the controllable things. Kids can't control whether they win or lose. Coaches can't control whether they win or lose. The parents sure can't control because they aren't even involved in the active game day environment, or shouldn't be, I should say. And so, like, how we approach those conversations, that's just one core concept that I referenced, that Elm Tree of Mastery, but hopefully that helps explain how it applies to the coaches and parents differently than it does to the kids.
I've always thought that was so funny. You drop a pass on third down, then you go to the sideline and the coach rips his headset off and says, "You got to catch that." And you think, "Oh, you're right. I didn't even think about that part." Right? Like,
Right.
my bad. I wasn't trying to do that. Right? I think that's so funny when people say that. Again, and I think, in our world, I think we try to show why we are important as coaches, right? If an athlete fails and they immediately look at you, it's, oh, well, you didn't, pull the bar high enough on a clean. You didn't push
Yeah.
hard enough to the ground. And you try to give them this immediate answer to fix their problem, when really it needs to be what did you feel?
Yeah.
Right. And like you said, what some of those questions that we are having in the van on the way to Mitchell's, we can do better as leaders and as parents to be able to, get our athletes more comfortable in those situations. And I think that failure piece is so big. We actually have an athlete right now. I think he's 6 or 7 years old, and he works with our football skills coach, and good little athlete. But every time he drops a pass, he starts crying. I mean, weeping. And then so our coach has to go over there and have to pick him up off the ground and say it's okay. And then he looks at his dad, and you can tell that dad is upset because he dropped this pass. So that's why this kid is crying. And then, it's a 30-minute session. He spends 15 of those minutes crying. And I continue to talk to our coach about how we can help relay this better message. But what are some of those things that you guys preach when you're talking about failure? Because you're saying it is so important. Failing is such an important piece. And I've meditated on failure a ton because I was super lucky. I know I grew up with a family who was very supportive. Everything I wanted to do on the sports side, they let me do. And a big thing that I kind of came to was I was able to explore movement and explore different sports with very little negative feedback. I mean, if any. I cannot remember one time. I'm sure there was, but I can't remember one time where I was with my mom or my dad or my sister and they were upset because I failed.
Yeah.
And I know that set me up as now a 37-year-old. Now I'm looking for reasons to fail. I want to not be good at something so I can learn it, because I know I get way better at that than I do going to a bench press or something that I'm very good at and then having success. And then people saying, oh man, you're good at it. Great stuff. So I'm going to keep bench pressing because that's the thing I'm good at, for example. So I'm really interested in how we take that failure piece, because not everybody wants to hear that, and not everybody's ready and willing to hear that also. Right.
Yeah.
So how do we help that? How do we help communicate that failure is not only a part of it, but quite possibly is the part of progress? What are some things that we can do to help our athletes understand that?
Yeah, well, first
And our
of
parents,
all,
even, I guess, to that.
totally. First of all, CT, I love that you meditate. That self-reflection is so important. That time to
Yeah, and
just
sorry, I
pause
didn't say that.
is so
I didn't say
important.
that to be like, oh yeah,
No,
you know what I mean.
I love it,
mean to bring it
though,
up like
because
that, but
I do think that is an important part, especially for parents and coaches, right? Who tend to be more caught up in environments. Like sometimes we need to, even in a brief instant, just slow down and pause, right? It doesn't have to be full meditation, but like slow down and pause. And again, that pause then creates the ability to react or to act intentionally versus react like in a knee-jerk way, right? And so I think like those pause moments are huge. The other thing that you said, CT, is you use the word fix, right? As parents and as coaches, and I will say this, especially as a man, we are kind of wired to fix problems in our kids, right? We have to resist the urge to fix everything, right? We have to let them work through some things themselves and figure out how to overcome some failure on their own sometimes without diving straight in and trying to eliminate the surface level issue of their reaction to failure, right? So sometimes we have to let them sit in the emotion for a little bit, right? And give them the space to kind of progress. Like I was listening to a podcast the other day and it was amazing. It was a huge epiphany. Like we are quick to try to correct behavior. And James, you said it, like, what's the root of it, right? We need to figure out what the root is in order to address it at the root versus simply treating failure. Like a lot of us as parents and coaches hate whining, right? We hate crying. We immediately want to shut it off and fix it. And it's like, let them sit in it for a little bit, right? And let's figure out, okay, what is it that is the root cause of that? Is it because they're worried about what mom and dad are going to say? So as a parent, to be able to sit back and be like, why does he react that way, right? A lot of it has to do with us and how we react to different things, right? So one of the other tools that we have in Positive Coaching Alliance is this thing that we call a mistake ritual, right? It's very, very important. It's a physical gesture of something that you do when you make a mistake to help you flush it and move on to the next play, right? Because at the end of the day, the most important play in any sport, I don't care what it is, whether it's weightlifting, whether it's, baseball, football, soccer, swimming, whatever the next play or whatever ahead of you, the next shift in ice hockey, whatever it is, that's the most important thing, not what already happened, right? You can't, if you're dwelling on what happened, you're not there to focus on what's coming, right? And so you see it in different sports all the time where one error happens, the kid emotionally derails themselves, and then all of a sudden 3 more happen and they're done for the day, right? And those failures aren't necessarily the physical failures, it's the mental failures, right? It's the little things. And so as a coach, one of the things that I spend a lot of time looking at is when a kid makes a mistake, what is the first place that they look, right? So your 6 to 8-year-old example, or 6 or 7-year-old example, until kids are the age of 13 years old, there's one of 3 places they immediately look. The first is usually straight at mom and dad, right? And so if mom and dad are reacting negatively, even if they're not saying anything, if their reaction is this, right? Or what are we doing? Or any kind of negative body language that could be perceived, even if it's not intended to be negative, if it could be perceived as something negative, what do you think your kid sees? Right? So that body language is really important, which is why we use this thing called a mistake ritual, which is should be the first reaction that we do no matter where the kid looks, right? So if the kid's looking at you as mom and dad, like a great one is all the kids love Taylor Swift, right? So like shake it off, like do something silly, be like shake it off, right? Or brush it off, right? Or something that's a physical gesture to help them be like, oh yeah, I need to get on to the next play. Like, forget about it. Let's go. Next play, right? So the first place they look is mom and dad. The second place they usually look is their feet, right? So oftentimes, like one of the things I love to recommend if I see a kid that's doing that is tie something in the laces that says it's okay or next play or something like that, that helps them get out of that moment. Because the kid that looks at their feet is usually the one that's shy, embarrassed, feels like they let somebody down, right? So you can see a lot of what they do. And the third place they look is coach, right? Ideally, we want them, if they look anywhere, to look at coach, right? But how we react as coaches is vitally important too, because same thing, if we have that negative reaction, if we have an emotional response, if we're dropping our head in shame, right? That's what they see and that's what they dictate in terms of what they do next. So those little things, resisting the urge to immediately fix it, helping them focus on the next play mentality, right? And then modeling it, right? Like telling our kids about times that we've failed and how we've overcome it and how it wasn't fatal. Like failure's not fatal. Sometimes for kids in the moment, it feels fatal because they're worried about what their parents going to say or what their teammates going to say. There's emotional ties to it. But a lot of it is more extrinsically motivated than it is intrinsically. Most of our kids, I can't recall the source of this, but one of our trainers, who's a sports psychologist by trade, shared some information that if there was zero external influence, the average age of kids caring about winning and losing is about 13 years old. Right. And so some people will be like, hey, well, I don't really tell my kid that I care. But then it's like, well, how do you react when the Browns fail on Sunday, when they lose on Sunday? Right. If the Browns lose on Sunday and you're cursing and swearing and, moping around for the rest of the day, like, what does that tell your kid about the way that you care about winning? Right. So they like all these things that we do, the way we model certain things, the way we model and narrate certain things, our kids pick up on all of it.
I think it's
Man.
really valuable for any coach to be able to take the small step back and observe not what happened, but how the athlete is reacting to what happened. And I think that's a jump that's hard to make. And maybe it takes some maturity, or maybe it takes conversations with guys like you and the work you guys do. But it is so important because if at the end of the day, we do want that growth from the athlete, it's going to have to come from them. It's
Yep.
not what we're going to be doing with them. It's what they're going to be doing on their own. So if they don't want to fail because they're afraid of what's going to happen next, are they going to practice on their own? Or are they going to make mini
Totally.
games in their practices to make it fun for them? Are they going to become obsessed in a positive way with the work to get to the result? But until we can take that small step back and observe the athletes we are trying to help, we can't really do that. And then
100%.
and then one more thing with you bringing in the reaction to pro sports and parents watching pro sports, the youth are also watching the professional athletes and
Oh
watching
yeah.
their body language, and that's something that is also frustrating to see.
Yeah.
It's cute with the little celebrations, right?
Yeah.
But what about the negative reactions that professionals are allowed to get away with that then we see in the athletes that we work with? How do you guys breach that conversation in terms of, yeah, these are great role models in terms of what we want to look like physically, what we're able to do physically, but they're not always the best role models for how we want to act and how we want to be good
Yeah.
teammates,
Well, and it's funny because it is a problem, right? But it's also a problem that we have zero control over,
right?
right? So we focus a lot on like how do you define your controllables, right? You hear all the time, control your controllables. Well, if you say that to a kid, do they really know what their controllables are? Right, which is why we use ELM Tree of Mastery because it's specific. Like your effort, your learning, your mistakes are okay. Like that mindset, there are specific things that you can do versus just saying something like control your controllables, right? We can't control what professional athletes do. We can't control what um, the talking heads in media are focused on, right? The media loves toxicity. They love picking up on the negative things as opposed to the positive things. And so, knowing that we can't control all that, we need to really focus our attention on the things that we do have control. How do we, like, when those things happen, do we talk to our kids about it? And be like, hey, would you do this in your game? It's like, why or why not? Right? Should we, like, it comes back to what I mentioned earlier in terms of honoring the game and how we teach that principle to our kids. It's an acronym called ROOTS, right? Develop or act with respect towards rules, officials, opponents, teammates, and self, right? So is the way, like when we're trying to, and again, we're in a character development environment. Let's level set that, right? The pro, even college now, and it pains me to say this because that was my background for so long. Like it's basically professional sports. It's a business, right? Very, very different focus. The entire mission is very different. Youth and high school sports is purely developmental, right? Whether they make it to pro or not. We hope some of them have a chance to. We hope they have that urge. We hope they have that talent. We help develop and cultivate that. Awesome. But if they don't, what is it that they learned that's going to make them successful in whatever they do next is where we need to maintain our focus. And so having those conversations with our kids of hey, when you saw, I'm just going to throw Gronk for a random football player. When you saw him, spike and taunt the ball, like, do you think that is respecting his opponents? Right? Do you think that, like, yeah, he's caught up in the emotion, like, but how do we, with your team, how do you act when you have those moments, right? So it's those little things, right? And at the end of the day, like some of those things are fun too, right, for the kids. And so you got to be able to draw that line of what's fun versus disrespectful, right? We don't want to take away fun, but we also want to make sure we don't do it in a way that crosses the line being disrespectful towards others, because at the end of the day, we're teaching respect to our kids actively, not just on the field of play, but in the classroom, in the workplace environment, whatever they end up doing down the road too. Um, so yeah, it's having those conversations, right? Of well, what did you think? When you saw, I'm blanking on an example right now, but when you saw, a player or a coach acting this way, especially towards officials, for instance, like, what do you think? And have that conversation and dialogue and be like, well, in your environment, because we're focused on teaching, basic human skills and character, like, what would you do instead? Right. And so, I love that you said they're the model in terms of the physical attributes and the abilities and that side of things. But and there are some that are models of all the other things too. and so if you can find ways to point out those other positives too, that helps.
You bring up Gronk, the Tyreek Hill peace sign is the one I probably see the most.
Yeah.
Every speed drill, the kid who crosses it, even if they cross by that much before the other kid, they throw the peace sign on him. And I'll say, how are you going to feel when somebody does that to you?
Yeah.
I'm like, we don't do that here. You're not going to taunt somebody. We're running 10 sprints. You won one of them, and you're taking, that opportunity to throw the peace sign. Like, how do you think, you're going to feel when somebody does that to it when you lose? And then it's,
That's the thing.
I probably wouldn't feel pretty good about it. And then they don't do it again. Right. But it takes being intentional about those conversations.
You have to. And CT, it's so funny because it's a conversation I have with my two kids all the time, even the way they treat each other. Like, they're taught in school the golden rule when they're in kindergarten. Like, what's the golden rule? Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's like, I'm big on that. The sports environment, even though it's more intense, it's more energetic, that doesn't derail the focus on the golden rule. That's just human decency. Right. And so, again, I expect my kids to follow the golden rule no matter what they're doing. Right. Whether it's sports, whether it's school, whether it's, here at home playing with their brother. Like, the golden rule to me it's the golden rule for a reason. And so I love that you had that, because and that's again the importance of why I think what PCA does in terms of the coach training is it's increasing intentionality of using those life lesson teachable moments, because it's really easy to just be like, oh, this is just sports, or oh, it's boys being boys, or oh, it's whatever you want to call it. It's like, well, what are we trying to do here? Like, what is the purpose of our involvement in this environment? What is the mission of the organization? It's to develop young kids through sport, right? So if we're missing out on those life lesson opportunities and teachable moments like that, and we're just sweeping it under the rug, right, then it tends to snowball, right, and become habitual. Right. And then all of a sudden, the habitual pieces are where we run into blow up moments that then need to be completely reprimanded or more deeply corrected. And so it's seizing those teachable moments is huge.
You mentioned, I mean, a lot of things that I wrote down that I want to kind of expand on, but real quick, you mentioned the media earlier, and it's so funny. Funny is probably not the right word, but 3 weeks ago, Caitlin Clark was the face of college basketball. She's changing the landscape of sports. I mean, we haven't seen somebody like her. I would be shocked if we see anybody like her in the future. A week later, she gets picked to my Indianapolis guy, right? A diehard Indiana Fever fan all of a sudden. And, she gets picked and she plays 2 games. They go 0-2. And we have Sports Center on at the gym. And the headline is, is Caitlin Clark all that she's cracked up to be? Like, Caitlin Clark has lost 2 in a row. Has she lost her special sauce? All this stuff. And I got so frustrated. I thought, guys, she is changing the game of sports.
Oh, yeah.
She got more people to watch women's basketball than ever. I mean, literally than ever in the history of sports. And now 100%. You talking heads of the media want something to talk about, and you're going to throw this big fit about, oh, maybe she's not all she's going to be. And you can't sit there and support and say, oh, she's a rookie playing against professionals who've been playing at this level for years. And they don't want to talk about that. They want to talk about negativity, right? What can parents do when they see things like that to be able to help their children navigate through those situations? Because I could see some kid reading that headline and then going out to the parents and say, man, Caitlin Clark's really not that good, huh?
Yeah.
And it's like, stop. She is unbelievable. The best player we've ever seen. You just, Stephen A. Smith needs something to talk about. What can we do?
Yeah.
What are some of those conversations we can have?
Well, it's funny because it's not even just kids that see that and then act in that way. There's adults that see that and immediately fall in line and start questioning. Like, that's a human thing, not even a kid's. But our kids, again, don't have the natural ability to process things and think through for themselves the way that we do as adults, because their brains are still developing, right? So they rely more on what adults tell them as truth versus being able to sift through, okay, is this actually true? So I think the best thing you can do as a parent when they see those things and you see those things is pause them, right? And be like, well, what makes you say that? Well, so-and-so said that on TV. Well, like, okay, just because so-and-so said that, do you think it's true? Because what they're not saying is Caitlin Clark's now 0-4, but she's also one of the five. She's like fifth, I think, to the number of points that she has at this point in WNBA history, right? They're not talking about that, right? They're talking about that she's not shooting logo threes and draining, putting up 30, 40 points like she did in college. Like that's, but the other big thing too, and this is huge and it's a big piece that we talk about a lot, is comparison is a thief of joy, right? Like if you start comparing yourself to, and this is true of our kids and their environments. Like if you're comparing yourself to professional athletes, one, there's no comparison. You're not there yet. It's a reality check. But two, like they compare themselves to their teammates. They compare themselves to their opponents. They compare themselves to anybody else that's around them. And you can't control what other people do, right? Like that's one of the uncontrollables in sports. You can't control the talent level of the other team. You can't control the talent level or how hard your teammates work. You can't control so many other factors. So you need to narrow the focus on what you can control. And so if we can teach that through moments like that, like, hey, if you're Caitlin Clark right now, like, yeah, you're used to putting up 30. What do you think she's thinking through right now? Like, how would you feel if you were in Caitlin Clark's shoes? Right. And forget what they're saying. Like, what would you do if you were that athlete right now and you feel like you're not performing at the level that you're used to performing? What would you do? What are your controllables? So I think it's just shifting the narrative and opening up conversation around those things. And it's, I don't know about you guys, I'm a diehard Ted Lasso fan, right? That like
the best.
Be curious, not judgmental approach. Like if we can instill that in our kids, and if we can model that as adults and be like, I wonder why they're saying that. Like she's doing this, right? But that they're talking about that. I wonder why that is, and have that conversation with your kid. It's amazing the way that you see the kid's mind works. But yeah, a lot of it's just not shying away from those conversations, encouraging them to try to figure out how to think for themselves as opposed to just believing truth of others blindly.
We started watching Ted Lasso because my wife's name is Danny Rojas.
No way.
One of the characters, yeah. So somebody told one of her friends was like, "Yo, you got to watch this show. They, you're the namesake of one of the main charcharacters." And
That's
I think it's
amazing.
episode 2. Danny Rojas. We're like,
Oh yeah.
Like, oh, I'm with Danny. You had mentioned.
Awesome.
I want to backtrack a little bit. You had mentioned that you were baseball Ryan, right? Like that was your thing, right? And I know I've heard you speak on. I was watching a video you were speaking on the radio where you said, that ends for everybody. At some point, they're going to be done with their sport. Do you guys, and I'm sure you do, that's kind of why I'm asking it, but how do you guys help athletes understand that there is more to them and more to their identity than sports? I know most of the athletes we see, all their parents talk about is how they're performing on the field. Thank you so much for your training. They've done this and this and this on the field. And it's like, that's great. And we love hearing that. But the important conversations to me are the ones we had 2 weeks ago when a parent dropped her kid off for the 3rd session with one of our coaches. And she said, "Hey, CT, I got to tell you, he is in 3 weeks, right? I mean, an hour and a half total of training with one of our young coaches. Said he is more confident. He feels better about himself. I see him looking in the mirror differently. I see him talking to, to girls. He had never talked to girls before. Now he's going out to talk to, and those, and she said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm taking up your time." And I said, "Hold on a second." I was like, "This is why I do this. This is why I don't care if they caught 4 touchdown passes in the championship game. I cared about how they affected the people around them and how they are as human beings." What's the conversation like with you guys in helping athletes understand how important that is?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, hats off to you to have that why, right, and to have that conversation. I mean, those are the things that make me tick as a coach. Like when I see a kid grasp a concept for the first time, right? Not even the fact that they did it, it's the confidence that follows, right? When
Right.
you see progression, it's the confidence that follows. And I think, you know, having and opening up those conversations and having those moments around game time and practice to have those conversations with their kids, like, how are you? Like, how are you doing? And giving them a space, giving the athletes a space to have that conversation, to talk about non-sport related things. And when they bring up sport related things, being able to say, hey, I'm not talking about how are you doing in terms of your training at home. Like,
Right.
how's school? Right? Like, what are you working on? What's keeping you up at night? Like, how do you feel towards these things? I think those are really important. And creating a space as a coach where the kids can have those conversations amongst each other and having space. Like, a lot of coaches were quick on, okay, once you get to the field, like, shut off everything else in your life. Once you cross that line, it's all about baseball. Like, we can't do that as adults. Like, we can't come walk in the door at home and switch into parent mode and forget all the stresses that happened over the course of that day. Right? So I think introducing mindfulness to those athletes, right? Creating, because so many of them, I mean, I'm coaching 8-year-old Little League, and just on Saturday, we had soccer picture day. They had a soccer game. We have this baseball game. Then we're going to this. We have a birthday party in the middle. Like, it's go, 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 go. And so I'm like, you know what? The first 5 minutes of practice today, I can create that pause for those kids just to sit. Like, let's just lay in the grass and look at the sky for a moment. Like, let's just chill, right? And like,
Right.
hey, you know, you guys got a lot going on. I know you rushed here and you're changing your clothes as you're still running to the field. Let's just, if we recognize those opportunities and give kids space to have those types of conversations and get to know each other, I think one of the most important things a coach can do is help a kid find themselves outside of a sport. Like, doing team building activities that are not sport related, right? Like going and volunteering for picking up garbage in your community or whatever it might be. Like, doing things and creating conversation where they can talk to each other about non-sport related things, I think is so important. And for
Yeah.
kids to feel like they have that space, you know, they will naturally talk about what they're doing in the moment. So we have to help them create space to talk about the other things that matter more.
James is so good at this stuff, and I have to bring this up to kind of pat you on the back, James. But he says something before and after every session where he says you want to leave the space better than you found it, right? And not only that, but you want to leave the athletes you're training with better than you found them.
Yes, sir.
And so by that we mean, can you spot somebody? Can you give somebody a coaching point? Can you help an athlete get confidence in a movement pattern that they were not confident in before? Right. And he's always preaching that stuff. And we've taken that into our second location out on the east side where we talk about that all the time. Like, leave these athletes better than you found them. I don't care if you PR. I don't care if you hit a better flying 10 number than you had. I care because you care about it. But what we
Yeah.
really care is we want you to leave this training session a better human being than you were when you first came in. And to that point, we were giving a discussion to a big soccer club this winter, where the owner and the guy who started T3 talked to the group, and then I started talking about the training. And I started by saying, hey, you can go get strength work anywhere. You can go to Instagram, you can go to TikTok, you can find a good training program. I was like, you can go run sprints at the track, you can get fast anywhere. And my boss is looking at me like, bro, where are you going with this? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, this is what we want them in here. I said, one thing we can guarantee is that when they leave here, they will be better people than when they
Yep.
got here. And I think that was a thing that the parents heard and kind of attached to. They said, oh, so really it's not about strength and conditioning, because it is, but then it's about, like, how are we making our kids better and how are we making them better people? And it ultimately being a very successful, it was a great couple months of training with that team, but it always came from that part. It always came from, and I said it to our coaches every time before we went out there, like, hey, let's build the culture. Let's go out there and build a better culture than it was when they first got here. Right. And that's something we're always preaching. And again, I have to give all credit to James, because he was one of the first people in this space who I ever heard talk about that, because it's always get your bench up, get your back squat up. And James says, leave that individual you're training with better than you found him. And I think that's just such a
It's huge.
powerful frame to have.
Well, and James, I love that specifically because that was one of the biggest things that I took from my youth coach. So my youth coach was inducted to our youth club's Hall of Fame 2 years ago. Without hesitation, I drove the 8.5 hours home to be there for his Hall of Fame induction. Like, the biggest thing, I hear his voice all the time still when I'm walking my dog in the neighborhood and I go to walk past a piece of garbage laying on the ground. I hear, leave it better than you found it. I immediately turn around, pick up that piece of garbage and bring it home with me in my pocket. Like, but I think that way and I apply, like, that would be one of my biggest mottos in life, right? And for the exact same reason, it's not about the spaces, but it's about the people. It's about, the influence that you have on others. And I love that you guys both take your role as a coach to heart, because that's really what it's about. When you guys are, my favorite quote by Maya Angelou is, people will forget what you said, people will forget what they heard, people will never forget how you made them feel, right? And that is very, very real. And the other quote of, people don't care what you know until they know how much you care. 100% accurate. And so, that doesn't mean, again, sunshine and rainbows, kumbaya. You can still have expectations. You can still hold people accountable to those expectations. But knowing that the role that you play in their lives is so much bigger than what you're teaching them physically, is really where things take off. And guess what? By taking that approach, the physical side tends to happen a lot quicker than it does if they resent being there with you. So I love the way you guys coach, man. It's awesome.
We appreciate that, and we've been lucky enough to be around a lot of good mentors in the coaching space to understand the difference between a trainer and a coach, and understand that we have the opportunity to multiply what we do by helping pave the way for other coaches to have that paradigm shift. That quote from Maya Angelou is exactly how I ended. We had our interns start up on Monday, and I got to take them through a full 90-minute workout like we do with our athletes. And that's exactly what I told them at the end, is like, you're not going to remember the whiteboard workout that we did today, but you'll remember how you were challenged, how you were coached. And that's what the athletes that you're going to get to work with this summer are going to remember about your experience here. Or they might not remember you because you didn't make that connection. And it's not going to be because of the workout you put on the board.
Love that. Amen, man.
Ryan, a couple more questions, man. Then we'll wrap up. We've said a lot of stuff, right? Okay, so we don't want the athlete to be reactionary, right? We want them to have a plan, and we want them to have systems to be able to work through. We don't want, the parents being too much. We don't want the athletes looking at the parents, but we need to be, as parents and leaders, a good resource for the athlete, right? There are a lot of things that we want to accomplish, and that's hard to do. You had talked earlier, and I just sat back and I said, whoa, because I'm thinking, like, where do we start, right? Because parents are doing their best. Every parent, at least that that I know and that we work, they are doing their best. But everybody can get a little better. But they might listen to this and think, okay, there's a lot of things that I'm trying to piece together, right? What are either places that we can start, or kind of another way to frame it is, what are a couple things that, say, like 2 to 3 things that you really would like coaches, leaders, and parents to be able to take from this conversation and start doing it immediately to be able to help the athletes that they work with?
Yeah, great question. It starts internally, right? Like, in general, do you know your own personal values, right? So being able to know and understand yourselves. There's a great exercise from the University of New Mexico. It's a values-based exercise. You basically print out like these cards, cut them up. It's like 100 different values, and there's space to add your own, and you literally sort those cards. Very important to me, somewhat important to me, not at all important to me. And you go through and you sort and figure out what are your top values, and then how do you want to then take those top values and implement those in the way that you parent, right? So that's one. Even simpler than that, we actually have a PCA exercise called the 100-point exercise. So this is more sport specific, but it's basically a list of 15 different reasons why you put your kid in sports, right? Like I want them to develop self-confidence. I want them to develop friendships. I want them to learn skills at the sport. I want them to get a college scholarship. It has a wide range of different reasons why you put your kid in sports. And a lot of it's just increasing that intentionality of what type of environment do I want to create, right? And so you have 100 points, you split them up amongst those things. There's space to add your own if you have a different reason why, and you add them in and you look and see, okay, well, where did I apply the most points? Those are my top 3 focuses. And how do I make sure my actions actually align with those 3 top priorities? Because a lot of us as parents have no idea. We just put our kids in sports because everybody puts their kids in sports. And then we start playing travel sports because everybody's kids are playing travel sports, right? And so there's no intentionality there. So it's just increasing that intentionality of why, and then what environment is going to be the best fit for your child to be able to help achieve that why. But even beyond that, taking that same document and giving it to your kid and understanding what makes your kid tick is huge, because at the end of the day, it's their journey, not yours. And so their motivations may be crazy different than yours at different stages, right? You give it to a 13, 14-year-old, they may have college scholarship high on their priority list. You're like, okay, do you know what that means?
You know
Right.
what
And you're
that
able
takes.
to have that
Yep.
conversation, right? And that helps you as a parent be like, okay, these are goals. I'll never forget, we did a workshop, and there was it was with a lower income group of parents, and one of them put like 80 points on college scholarship, and her son was a 10-year-old baseball player. And my knee-jerk reaction was, you got to be kidding me. Like, you want, like, your focus for your 10-year-old is college scholarship. And I was like, you know what? This is their goal, not mine. So let me ask, like, why is that your goal? And it was the best answer ever. She goes, Ryan, it's easy. He would be the first person in our family to go to college. And I'm like, oh, wow, that's an
Chills, yeah.
incredible goal, right? Like to have your child be the first in your family, like that's a bigger picture goal than anything I ever thought about for my kids, right? But what it did was it opened up an opportunity to have that conversation of, okay, athletic versus academic, what opportunities exist for first generation college goers, right? Like, you can't put that pressure on your 10-year-old because they're going to be part of that statistic that burns out by age 11 and a half years old. Right. So like, how do we then focus on that being a long-term goal versus a short-term goal? Right. So it just opened up conversation. But I think just an exercise like that helps you as a parent really look at, well, what do I actually want my kid to get out of this experience, instead of me simply dropping them off at the field and picking them up and running all over the place. Like, where's the intentionality? So that exercise is really, really huge. Especially if you don't have the time to carve out to do the deeper values work. But that's where it starts, and then it really is listening to your kid. I mean, the national statistics show the 2 biggest reasons kids play sports is they want to have fun and they want to play with their friends, right? 2 of the biggest reasons kids quit sports, it's no longer fun because mom and dad or because the coaches put too much pressure on me to perform, or my kids are quitting because for those same reasons, and now my buddies aren't playing anymore, so I don't want to play anymore. Like, it's really that simple for our kids. So having that self awareness and understanding of why our kids are playing really helps increase that intentionality of what type of experience you want your kids to have too.
So many great points there. That's surprisingly too, for some people who might not totally be aware of this, that happens at the highest levels. I remember when
Totally.
we first got into the college sector, I had a conversation, I think it was a softball team, where I was, the training wasn't as good as I thought it should be. It wasn't up to standard, and I was pretty frustrated about it. And I brought it up to them, and I was, talking about how we've got to strive for excellence, and you want to be the best player you could be on the field, and blah blah blah. And then I stopped, and I thought about it, and I said, I wonder if some of these athletes are playing because their best friends are playing. right? Maybe they don't want out of the weight room what I want them to want out of the weight room. Of course, I'm a weight room guy. Of course, I want, and I believe so positively in the weight room and all the effects that it has just outside of training. But then after I kind of reframed it and thought, you know what, there are probably some athletes who don't really even like the sport. They're just here in a new state, right? They're going to college. They got some type of benefit, scholarship wise, and they know that their best friend from high school came and played here. And as soon as I made that kind of mental note, I started coaching completely differently. I thought, how do I make this enjoyable so they want to be here? Right. Because if we can even, and again, another James thing, right? Like you don't want to be, he always says, you don't want to be their last strength coach. Like you don't want to be the reason that people stop training. Right. So what can we do as coaches and leaders to be able to say, hey, man, this is not about me. This is not an ego thing. I want to help you be as successful as you can possibly be in whatever that is. And if it's not sports, great. Right. But if it is, and you want some help and you want to be able to do that, I can do that. But if not, I want to be able to guide you to be able to do whatever it is you want. And I think that was a really interesting, again, paradigm shift for me where I thought, man, of course people don't love the weight room like I love the weight room. Dummy.
Yeah.
Like you school for this, right? Like
Right.
they're not in school for that and they don't need this. And so that was a big moment for me.
Good for you to recognize that. And that's again why I think the coach training that we do is so important, because it creates again that pause and that like self-reflection of, not everybody's lived experience is the same as mine. Yeah. So I can't coach kids the way that I was coached or the way I would be I would want to be coached, because they're different human beings, right? What makes them tick is vitally different. So I love that you have that conversation with your athletes. I encourage parents to have that same conversation with their own athletes, right? Because again, their desires and goals and what they define as fun and what they enjoy about sport could be completely different than what you perceive as a parent.
Yeah. Ryan, for people who have been with us this whole hour, man, and there's so much to take from this, holy cow. People are interested in PCA. They're interested in you. How can people either get in touch with you or get involved with the Positive Coaching Alliance? Is there emails or hashtags or social media that people can find you guys?
Absolutely. So first of all, PCA's general information is positivecoach.org. That's our website. Tons of information on there, tools, training, resources, online courses. Like I mentioned, we've got completely free that parent exercise that I mentioned, that 100-point parent exercise is a free exercise that lives on our website. So a ton of information there. So highly recommend doing that. Positive Coach US on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So give that a follow for sure. And then personally, I'm very reachable. So especially if you're in Northeast Ohio, I live in the Avon community. So I'm on the west side. I'm very approachable, very reachable. Follow me on Twitter. It's at PCA_virtue. I'm active on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, so I'm pretty easy to find. But yeah, I'm more than happy to have any conversations with anybody that I can help.
Awesome, man. We so much appreciate you having me on. This was a great kickoff to season 3 of Cutoffs and Coffee, and I mean it just works so perfectly. There's things that athletes can get from it. There's things that coaches can get from it. There's things that parents can get from it. And there's so much information out there, like you mentioned, for individuals who are interested and really enjoyed this conversation to be able to pursue. So again, man, thanks so much for being on. This was awesome for us. And we'll obviously all be in touch and continue to work together as we move forward. But for everybody who made it this far, again, we appreciate you. Thanks for listening to episode 62 of Cutoffs and Coffee. And Ryan, I teased this a little bit in the beginning, but 3 things that we ask you to do, every time at the end of the podcast is: 1, please continue to practice gratitude. We talked about how important that is. Number 2 is tell the people that you love them. And number 3 is you got one life to live. You might as well live this life stimulated. So thanks for listening. Ryan, thanks again. And we will catch you guys in the next one.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.